voice of the wind insisted on being a part of this capture. Greetings. My name is Sol Bianco. This is WayFarer, WayShower. I'm glad that you have found your way here. Welcome. I may or may not have already said that. This is the trailhead to Panther Meadows. And I did, as stated in episode 1, head into Panther Meadows with the Golden Teachers and this intention of ceremonial release. There's so much that I could say that I want to say. The first thing that's coming through to me is the energy of grandmother and grandfather. It's funny, even in the previous video that I shot, one of the first things that happened was that the hummingbird came to me, the symbol of my grandmother. But in truth, I'm also in mourning for another grandmother right now. And I came to a point in the trail where someone had balanced some stones together. Generally, these are sort of temple-like in their structure, but this one very strongly evoked grandmother for me. And I sat with this stone statue, and I was reflecting on how grandmother is who we come to for food, for nurturance, emotional, a hug. I was allowing myself to feel held by that energy. I also was encountering parts of the landscape that had the presence of water, which stood in such stark contrast to those parts of the landscape that were so dry. The solidity of the stone, though, was so appreciated, and the heat of the sun. I felt humbled as well by grandfather. I was sitting with my own resistance to that masculine wisdom and energy. In a sense, here, as we're nearing the end of Cancer season, someone with my Chiron placement being in Cancer, I was sitting with how the experiences in youth of not having had that maternal nurturance in the way that I desired or needed, how it's led to me seeking that in my life where actually what would serve me more would be to lean into and to experience being held by brotherhood and finding healthy role models in the masculine, but in part it's been about crossing through the feeling of a lack of safety. And I was sitting as well with fear, and how fear is ultimately the lack of safety, and how this is experienced in both the feminine and the masculine. I was sitting with the parts of myself that automatically, instinctually feel fear relative to any human being, regardless of if there's any reason for that. And this was really potently reflected to me in one of the experiences that I had at the Rainbow Gathering, in that I desired to share a song of mine that I received when Pluto first entered into Aquarius, called Rainbow Tribe. This was before I'd even gone to a Rainbow Gathering. Rainbow Tribe is something I've connected into for a long time. And I was literally sitting amongst Rainbow Tribe and still experiencing the parts of myself that have only ever known being outcast or an outsider, lack of belonging. So today, as I was walking through these trails, and I would instinctively feel my body tense up whenever a human would come close, I asked myself, what if each person were a friend? What if this were the normal expectation? I realized part of the fear has been relative to not being able to have me and my needs in the context of others. i.e., if I'm in a space where I'm journeying or I'm meditating or something like this, if a person approaches, the part of me that tenses up is the part of me that thinks that I need to perform some sort of social convention. I don't actually need to do that. And hopefully, I've been attracting more and more the experience of other humans who are attuned to when is or isn't the right moment to engage, who have that awareness of when there's a welcome and when there's a I'm in my own process, please respect that type of a vibe, you know? But the wise grandfather, that's my next step. So I kept returning to something that an incredibly remarkable elder shared with me at the Rainbow Gathering. He's called Hoot, like the sound an owl makes. The owl being another profound animal spirit guide. It's been all over the place. It's my journey. And I admit the know-it-all part of my being in hearing him bring this up was like, I already know this, right? This was a humbling thing for me. He talked about the double slit experiment and how the presence of the observer influences whether or not the light is perceived as particles or a wave, whether it takes that shape, you know? And I had, again, come across this before, but what he did was he applied it to us as humans, as light beings. He said the particles are the individuals and the wave is the collective. But it was more so what struck me was the power of the perception of others. And this was something that I was also sitting with as well. So in a moment when I was really feeling the mushrooms, I was lying down on a stone. Essentially, I felt like a crystal just baking, charging in the sun. And I had some of my stuff, like further along the path, and there was a little part of myself that was self-conscious in having heard the voices of other humans passing me by. But I knew that it wasn't my truth in that moment to engage with them, to open my eyes, anything. I was just in it. And I thought about how it takes the strength of will is the strength of one's own commitment to and connection to one's own sense of self. To honor and to maintain my form in the way that it desires to come through. In other words, I could have collapsed into the wave and performed in a way that my mind deemed was, socially acceptable. But that wasn't actually authentic to me in that moment. What was authentic to me in that moment was that I maintained my particleness. My particality. There's got to be a word for that. By the way, for those who are also word nerds, please, in the link in my description below, check out my Substack, where I get to go really deep into words and etymology through art and written word. That's more the place for that. So yeah. It was important to me in that moment to learn the lesson of maintaining my expression and my shape, irrespective of what was or wasn't being perceived by other humans. But I was thinking, to go back to the experience I had at the Rainbow Gathering, one of the reasons why I felt such a sense of regret around having kept myself small, this was my perception, by virtue of not sharing, it was when Hoot shared this piece of wisdom that it hit me that something that I've been longing for has been a shift in the way in which I am being perceived, or a newness of experience relative to how I'm being perceived by others. And that this is actually a key fundamental ingredient to growth and to expansion. It's not enough to experience the growth within, just as in the zodiacal wheel, we're looking at polarity. We're looking at one side of the spectrum and the other. So the circle cut in half, there's the lower hemisphere, the lower half of the circle, that's the interior experience, and above that part of the circle is the exterior realm. And I'm someone who has been very focused and has done a lot of work in the interior realm. But then that energy needs be moved upward, because that's how it falls back down and feeds the creative engine. So the wealth of what I have cultivated in my inner journeying, what serves in grounding that is in putting it outwards and having that reflected back to me. And in ways that I won't even be able to anticipate. In that, another thing that really struck me about this conversation that we were having about light, I was sharing how I was contemplating the rainbow as this symbol of both the collective, it's all the colors, and the individual, each band of color, right? And I spoke to the necessity for the distinction. The distinction is actually what preserves each color and allows them all to be together but to be seen. And then someone else, a very dear and wise friend, she said, when all the colors are mixed together, you get brown. That's Earth. This was really mind-blowing for me because I never thought of it that way, because it took me back to a lesson that I learned on a permaculture farm on the Big Island of Hawaii, which is that our ancestors are in the soil. And that ties back into the number 13, which is to say death, but ultimately transformation. I was resting in the awareness of being transformation, or rather holding the space for transformation. But then I returned to this idea that is popular in spirituality of self-transcendence. And I really understood the degree to which this is a form of escapism. I felt it as a violence to the self, you know? We've turned self and ego into a bad thing, a wrong thing, or just this limitation that needs to be transcended. But my God, imagine going to all the work as a soul to frickin' incarnate here, to literally embody oneself here on this earth plane. Imagine then trying to spend time and energy getting out of that. What would be the whole point of that? That's so pointless. Not only that, but it's an act of violence to one's own expression and beauty and being. I just saw it as a form of self-abandonment, frankly, and I felt a sense of sadness and grief for the younger versions of self that I was not as present with as I could have been. I also realized shame. Shame is the feeling of being bad or wrong, or that something is bad or wrong, which is just to say it's fear. But I realized it stems down to the fear of being judged, and that ultimately it doesn't matter if I'm being judged one way or another way, so long as I'm able to maintain a connection to my own core, my own essence, my own beauty, my own truth, my own love. So there's really nothing to fear, and thus nothing to be ashamed of. Okay. This guy doesn't want to stay put. I need to make a phone call and have a snack and climb down this mountain. And by climb, I mean drive. It's going to be a nice coast. I'm glad you found your way here. May your way be clear. Cheers.